Our theme for this month is vision. During September, we're going to explore various aspects of how we might approach the theme of vision. Of course, the first thing that came to my mind is that as I age, concretely my vision is shifting. On a deeper level, people of faith have a vision of the kind of world we wish to bring into being. Parents have a vision of the kind of life they wish for their children. There are mystical and esoteric understandings of vision, including the rare few humans who have the ability to see into the future. Unitarians and Universalists have, as part of our heritage, those who saw a new message about the nature of God and humanity. We even have a story about an event we sometimes call our UU miracle that took place in 1770 in a little community in New Jersey. But the story actually began on two separate continents. In the wilds of New Jersey, it was all wilds of New Jersey in 1770. Of course, it may be that today, I don't know. And also in England. The backstory began in England when John Murray, a strong-willed itinerant Methodist preacher, visited a church member so he could bring her back to her senses. Now, personally, I've never had luck doing that in my ministry, so I don't know how he thought he could. But John Murray visited a woman who had been led from Orthodox Puritan beliefs by the preaching of James Riley. Riley's words were considered insane to the Orthodox because he preached that God would not damn the majority of men and women to the fires of hell, this being the prevailing Calvinist thought of the day. Rather, Riley taught that God would instead save everyone, that salvation was, in fact, universal. That kind of belief was just too heretical to be tolerated. So Murray visited the woman to convince her that this new belief was wrong. But slowly, during the conversation, rather than him changing her thoughts, she ended up converting him to Universalism. And he was converted. After that day, Murray left the Methodist faith and began preaching Universalism. That was not an easy move to make during that day, and Murray's friends denounced him. He was thrown out of the Methodist church. Soon a plague hit England, and Murray's wife and infant daughter died within months of each other. While grieving their loss, he was thrown into debtor's prison because he couldn't pay his medical bills for their care. Eventually, a relative paid his debt and he was released from prison in 1770. John Murray, despondent, decided to make a new life for himself. The way I first heard the story was that he decided he had two choices. He could commit suicide or he could sail to America. Thankfully for us, he came to America. However, he wanted nothing to do with religion or church or preaching. He just wanted to become a farmer and begin again. I wonder, have you ever had a time in your life when you wanted to begin again and somehow life led you in a direction you didn't plan to go? Perhaps that's how you got here this morning. Such was the case for John Murray. After crossing the Atlantic The ship on which he sailed to America ran aground off the shore of New Jersey. Stuck on a sandbar where the winds didn't change, Murray rowed ashore as part of a party from the ship that was going to purchase supplies. Here's where the two continents come together. Now, long before Murray walked ashore in 1770, a man named Thomas Potter had a vision. You see, Potter rejected the hellfire and brimstone preaching of the Calvinist preachers of his day. He believed that God was a loving God and that no one would be condemned to hell for eternity. He was a Universalist. Though I have not done the research, maybe Dillman has, Potter may have been influenced in his beliefs by the earlier teachings of Dr. George de Benneville, who also believed in universal salvation. But Potter's vision told him to build a meeting house in his village and that God would send a preacher who would preach the everlasting love of God. Potter built it and waited. And he waited in trust that one day a preacher would come. And then the day came when John Murray walked into Potter's village from the shore. It said, I don't know whether it's true, but it's a good story. It said that Murray knocked on Potter's door and Potter answered saying, "Are you the preacher that God sent to preach the universal love of God in the meeting house I have built?" What a great first line. Murray denied that he said, "I'm not the person." But Potter pressed him about whether he was or had ever been a preacher. Murray confessed that he had been, but he would never preach again. Over the next few days, the winds didn't change. The ship was right there on the sandbar. Murray and Potter had many conversations. Potter insisted that God would not let the winds change until Murray preached in the pulpit of the meeting house. Finally, Murray agreed that if the wind still had not picked up by Sunday, and if Potter would leave him alone, he would preach. But just once, just one sermon. After that, he would be gone on his way to his new life as a farmer. Well, the winds didn't change, and John Murray preached his first sermon in America that Sunday morning. The title set the tone for what would become his ministry. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. And you know, the next day, the winds changed, and Murray sailed to New York to begin his new life. Not as a farmer, but as a preacher who would bring the message of universalism to America. Eventually, Murray moved to New England and became an itinerant preacher of universal salvation. When he settled in Gloucester, Massachusetts in 1779, he established the Independent Christian Church, the first openly Universalist congregation in America. In those early days, the Universalists were pretty much the only voice speaking in opposition to the orthodoxy of the day. While the Calvinists spewed forth fire and brimstone and taught total depravity and probable damnation of most human souls, the Universalists steadfastly maintained the potential human goodness of humanity, the love of God, and the final harmony of all souls with God. For their nonconformity, the Universalists often faced ridicule and persecution. Our Universalist ancestors knew that they had an important doctrine to preach, perhaps the most important doctrine of all. The poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning is said to have once exclaimed, "Universalism? Why, it's the biggest word in the language." Our Universalist forebears knew that she was right. They knew that theirs was a faith completely in step with the democratic and optimistic spirit of the new American nation. They knew that they had a unique, exciting, forward-looking doctrine to share with the whole world. That first generation of American Universalists did their job well. They spread the word about universal salvation far and wide. Slowly, they convinced many within Orthodox religions that Universalism had an important message. Within a generation, in the years before the Civil War, the doctrine of universal salvation would no longer be confined to the Universalists. Soon, many Methodists were claiming it as their own as well. Soon, a new generation of Congregationalists were trading in their stern and severe Calvinism for more positive ideas like Christian nurture, and replacing their harsh, vindictive, judgmental God with a God whose primary nature was love and who cared for all his creation. Over the last 2 centuries, the issue of universalism has not been settled nor suppressed. My own theology is very universalist. I first learned it not from Unitarian Universalism, which I didn't find until I was 40, but from my United Methodist upbringing. When I was growing up, I learned that God was a loving God and that Jesus accepted all people. His ministry was one of love. But in the last 20 years, I've also seen a change in how many churches talk about the ministry of Jesus and who Jesus was. I remember about 15 years ago reading an article in the New York Times entitled "The Coming of the Warrior Jesus." That wasn't what I learned in Sunday school. The return of many churches in recent years to a theology of damnation and the classification of humanity into the chosen and the damned has reared its head, in part to try once and again to repress the Universalist message. I know that some of you have seen the movie Come Sunday, and I encourage others of you to see it. Come Sunday is on Netflix, I think. And it's actually the true story of Carlton Pearson, an evangelical preacher who was to be Oral Roberts' heir apparent. And one night he had an awakening of faith. He had a vision that God loved everyone and that love was universally available to all. The next Sunday, when he preached that message, the message of no hell and universal love, it was not well received. He ended up losing his church and his credentials as a minister. His livelihood was gone because he had the audacity to preach universal salvation. But he didn't give up. As he began a new church, he eventually became an affiliate minister at All Souls Unitarian Universalist in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Pearson is not alone. There have been cases of other ministers and faith traditions who have been put on trial when their vision of the nature of God and humanity led them to universalism. They, like John Murray and the early Universalists, not only stood in opposition to the prevailing notions of God, they stood in opposition to the prevailing ideas of human nature as well. Those early Universalists were bold enough to proclaim that humanity was not bound to sin, and that human nature was not a synonym for total depravity. Way back in 1770, John Murray reminded us that the true work of religious faith lay not in haunting children's dreams with images of hellfire and damnation, or divvying up the world between the saved and unsaved. The true work of religion lies in trying to bring more understanding and warmth into the lives of those with whom we share this world. Well over 200 years ago, John Murray declared that there is within the most ordinary men and women, within everyday people like you and me, a shining light that can pierce the darkness of our lives and pierce the darkness of our world. Go out into the highways and byways of America, your new nation, Murray commanded. You possess only a small light, but uncover it, let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light into the hearts and minds of men and women. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. Do not push them deeper into their theological despair, but preach to them the kindness and everlasting love of God. We possess individually and as a fellowship a light. Now more than ever, we need to uncover it. We need to let it shine. The Reverend Jeffrey Semenkowicz wrote, "Hope and courage. This is the calling of our particular community of faith, blessed with this name of cosmic proportions. We possess a small light, but let us uncover it in all we do and let it shine. When it flickers and fades and even goes out, let us have the tenacity and the patience to light it again and again. For it is still a light which burns forth with the possibilities of a new world. It's a light which burns eternally, our small and steady refraction of God's love, the illimitable light of the universe itself." And Unitarian Universalist theologian Paul Razor writes this of liberal theology: "Liberal theology is not for the faint of heart. It points us in a general direction without telling us the specific destination. It refuses to make our commitments for us, but holds us accountable to the commitments we make. It invites us to live with ambiguity without giving in to facile, easy compromise, to engage in dialogue without trying to control the conversation, to be open to change without accepting change too casually, to take commitments seriously but not blindly, to be engaged in our culture. The people around us don't need any more hell in their lives. There are too many preachers of hell in this world, and too many things in this world which are hellish and depraved and evil. But there are many things, too, that are honorable and just and true and lovely. It is on the side of those that we need to stand. Sometimes it's the simplest things that send a powerful message to the world about where we stand. Like standing on a bridge with messages of love and acceptance. We don't need to add to the voices of despair and selfishness in this world. There are already too many of those. We need to share our message of hope and courage today more than ever. So let us be willing to live the message of our faith as we go out into the world, offering the word of love to all those we meet.